right, this is lesson 1.3. It is called Population Growth and Ethno-Linguistic Diversity. So that's certainly a mouthful, but basically what this means is populations were expanding and people were migrating across the African continent, and that led to an increase in the number of languages that we see and the number of technologies and cultural traditions. And the key term for this one today is going to be Bantu. We're talking about a specific group of people called the Bantu that started in one area and migrated elsewhere. And the reason I have the picture of this lady on the slide is you might know that this hairstyle is known as Bantu knots. That might be the only context in which you've heard the term Bantu before. And today we're going to learn that Bantu is much more than a hairstyle. It refers to a whole set of cultural traditions and especially a language family. So we're going to trace the beginnings of that family and its migration across Africa. So here we have Africa once again. Perhaps you remember the Niger River that kind of hooks through the Sahel and savanna climate zones of West Africa. And the original ancestral homeland of the people that we call the Bantu was right about here at the mouth of the Niger River, kind of between the Niger River and the Congo rainforests, which you can see right here in dark green. That's kind of the Bantu homeland. And between about 4,000 years ago and about 500 years ago, there is a series of waves of migration in which Bantu speaking people kind of migrate and expand all across Central and Southern Africa, leading to this very large cultural zone of Bantu based languages, cultural traditions, and also some technologies that we're going to look at today. So, a natural question to ask is, why do we think, or how do we know that this migration happened, especially if it started 4,000 years ago? What evidence is there in the world and in Africa now that tells us that people were on the move throughout this period of history? One thing that we look at has to do with languages. So on this map, you can see certain language groups that are spoken throughout Africa. And one of them in particular, which is called Niger-Congo B, also known as Bantu, is the orange one. But what this means is that everywhere where we see modern African languages that are in this orange area of the map, they share certain grammatical and language structures, certain vocabularies and word roots, similar to the way that French and Spanish and Italian share certain word roots and grammatical structures because they all come from Latin. These modern African languages share certain features in common because they originated with some common ancestor, and all signs kind of point to this region between the Niger River and the Congo rainforest. How does a language spread out? It would most likely be the migration of the users of that language. And so we kind of look at the language patterns and conclude that there must have been speakers of these languages who were migrating out in the other direction and spreading all over the African continent from that point southward. And that kind of brings us to this map, which is the required source for this lesson. It points out that the origin of Bantu speaking people was somewhere around here, and the migrations started possibly as early as 3000 BCE, which is about 5,000 years ago, or possibly as recently as 2000 BCE. But over time, within the next 500 years, people who spoke these languages had traveled eastward across the African continent to Lake Victoria. They had crossed southward past the Congo River into the rainforest, and that they continued down on these southward and eastward pathways until eventually kind of covering the entire southern African continent by 1200 CE. Now, CE means AD. That is the number of years since the year zero, whereas BCE is the number of years before zero. So if we want to find out how long that took, we would add this number, 1200, to this number, 2000, and that would give us about 3,200 years ago that they started moving until when they got here. But if that's confusing, just the darker the green, the more recent the arrival in this area, and the closer the label is to white, the earlier it happened. So the Bantu people didn't just bring themselves and their language, they also brought some key technologies and skills with them as they were migrating to other parts of Africa. The first of those technologies and skills was farming. The Bantu people were very skilled farmers. They had agricultural settlements, and they, in particular, cultivated crops such as bananas, yams, and cereals. They were known to have produced a lot of grain crops. So we would see agriculture and farming kind of spreading across southern and central and eastern Africa along with these Bantu migrations over time. Another important technology that the Bantu were very skilled at was ironworking. So we'll stick with our Minecraft icons for iron, and we're going to look at the iron producing and smelting technology that the Bantu invented and carried with them as they migrated across Africa. So the Bantu were very skilled at smelting iron, and usually that involved the use of a special kind of furnace called a bloomery furnace. Here's a photograph of some Africans in more modern times working with a traditional bloomery furnace. A bloomery furnace is basically designed to take in charcoal and raw iron ore and smelt that ore into molten iron, which can then be shaped into usable metal. This was a very sophisticated metallurgical technology, and this certainly gave them an advantage, not only by allowing them to create more sophisticated metal farming tools, which vastly increased their crop yields and led to further population growth. It also gave them an obvious military advantage over people who had less sophisticated stone or wooden tools. So, as you can see, the Bantu people not only had a tremendous influence on Africa in general, they also had very sophisticated technologies and ways of increasing their population. The last question we'll deal with today is, to what extent is this relevant to the experience of African Americans today? Or, in other words, do most African Americans have Bantu ancestry? Can they trace their ancestry back to this group of people from ancient times who migrated across Africa and brought their technology? And the answer is pretty plainly yes. Many African Americans, anyone who identifies as being descended from enslaved people, likely has ancestry from this language and cultural region. You can compare these two maps and see that almost 1/4 of those enslaved people who were brought to what is now the United States came from countries like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Angola. The Republic of the Congo is over here. And so that's a very large percentage of those enslaved Africans who were brought to North America and to the United States, coming from countries in Southern and Central Africa, which are right about here. There are also ancestors of African Americans who may have originated in countries like Mozambique, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, and those are all going to be within this language group. So, as we work to center and situate Africa and its influence as a place of historical and cultural roots, ancestral roots for African Americans, it's important that we're familiar with the term Bantu and the cultural achievements of the Bantu people, as they are likely the earliest ancestors of many African Americans in our country today.